the blade pressed against Amber's throat before she could even scream. 2 sentries had dragged her from the tree line, her knees scraping against stone as they threw her down in the center of the courtyard. Torchlight carved harsh shadows across the faces of at least 40 wolves, who had gathered in a loose circle, their expressions ranging from suspicion to outright hostility. Amber's wrists burned where the iron cuffs bit into her skin, and the taste of blood sat heavy on her tongue from where she'd bitten the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was tall, sharp-featured, draped in a gown of deep crimson that pooled around her feet like spilled wine. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin at her temples, and her eyes, cold, calculating, the color of wet slate, swept over Amber with open contempt. "This is what crossed our border? A rogue? An Omega with no pack mark and no name worth speaking?" The woman circled Amber slowly, her heels clicking against the stone. The crowd parted for her without being asked. "I wasn't trespassing. I was following a trail. I didn't know this was claimed territory. Silence!" The woman stopped directly in front of her and crouched, tilting Amber's chin up with one manicured finger. "You don't speak unless I permit it. You are in Ashenmoor territory now, little wolf, and I am Salvara, first advisor to the Alpha King. Your fate rests entirely with me until he returns." Amber's heart hammered so violently she was sure every wolf in the courtyard could hear it. She had been tracking something, someone. For 3 days she had followed the scent through the graywood, past the river bend, past the old ruins where moss ate the walls. The scent was faint but unmistakable. It belonged to a child who was crying. And now she was on her knees, cuffed in iron, surrounded by wolves who looked at her like she was already dead. Salvara straightened, smoothing the front of her gown. "Search her." One of the sentries yanked open Amber's satchel and dumped its contents onto the stone. A water flask, a half-eaten bread roll, a worn leather journal, and a small, hand-stitched rabbit made from scrap fabric, its button eyes slightly crooked. Salvara picked up the stuffed rabbit between 2 fingers, turning it over with mild interest. "A toy. How sentimental." She dropped it back onto the pile. "Lock her in the East Hold. She can wait there until the Alpha King decides what to do with a rogue who wanders into his lands carrying children's playthings." "Please, I'm not a threat. I'm a healer. I heard a child crying in the woods 2 nights ago and I followed the sound. That's all. I just wanted to help." Salvara's hand connected with Amber's cheek so fast, the crack echoed off the stone walls. Amber's head snapped to the side. Stars danced behind her eyelids. "I said silence." The sentries hauled Amber to her feet and dragged her toward a narrow corridor that smelled of damp stone and old iron. The last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her was Salvara standing in the torchlight, watching her with the expression of someone disposing of something unpleasant. The East Hold was cold and small. A single window, barely wider than Amber's hand, let in a thin blade of moonlight. She pressed her back against the wall and drew her knees to her chest, breathing through the pain in her wrists. The iron cuffs were standard issue, designed to suppress a wolf's shift to keep them human and weak. She could feel it already, that heavy, smothering weight pressing down on the wolf inside her, like a hand clamped over her mouth. But Amber was used to being silenced. She had grown up in the Fenhollow Pack, the smallest and poorest territory in the northern range. No parents. They'd died in a border skirmish when she was 4. Raised by the pack's elder healer, a woman named Orla, who taught her everything about poultices and bone setting, and the way certain herbs could draw venom from a wound or bring down a fever in minutes. Amber had been good at it. Better than good. By 15, she was the only healer Fenhollow had. But healers were invisible. Useful, yes, but invisible. No one saw her at gatherings. No one asked her to dance at moonfire celebrations. She moved through the pack like a ghost with gentle hands, called upon when someone was broken and forgotten the moment they were mended. When Fen Hollow dissolved 3 years ago, absorbed by a larger pack in a territorial merger that no one had the strength to fight, Amber found herself packless. Rogue. The word alone carried a stain that most wolves never managed to wash clean. Rogues were distrusted, avoided, treated like stray dogs that might bite. So she had wandered, offering her skills wherever she could, staying a few weeks here, a month there, never long enough to belong. Until 3 nights ago, when she heard the crying. It was faint at first. Amber had been camped near a creek in the Greywood, mixing a salve for the blisters on her feet, when the sound reached her. A child, young, maybe 3 or 4, sobbing in ragged, exhausted bursts. The kind of crying that wasn't a tantrum or a plea for attention. It was the sound of a child who had been crying for so long they'd almost given up. Amber had followed it without hesitation. The trail had led her deeper into the forest than she'd ever gone, past scent markers she should have recognized as territorial warnings, but didn't because the wind had been wrong that night. By the time she realized she'd crossed into Ashenmoor, it was too late. The sentries had found her first, and the crying had stopped. Now she sat in the dark, wondering if the child was still out there, wondering if anyone else had heard, wondering if she was going to die in this cell for the crime of caring about someone no one else seemed to notice. She closed her eyes and rested her forehead against her knees. Sleep came in thin, restless layers. When light finally crept through the narrow window, Amber woke to the sound of boots on stone. Heavy, deliberate, accompanied by the creak of leather and the low murmur of voices. The cell door opened. He filled the doorway like he'd been carved to fit it. Amber had never seen an Alpha King in person, but she didn't need to be told. Everything about him announced it. The breadth of his shoulders, the controlled stillness in his posture, the way the air seemed to tighten around him as if even the atmosphere recognized his authority. His hair was dark, almost black, cut short at the sides and longer on top where it fell across his forehead, in a way that should have softened his face but didn't. His jaw was sharp. His eyes were the color of deep amber, gold shot through with brown, and they landed on her with an intensity that made her breath stutter. Zorion, Alpha King of Ashenmoor. She knew the name even if she'd never seen the face. Every wolf north of the river knew the name. He studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped inside and crouched, bringing himself to her level. The scent of him hit her like a wall. Cedar, rain-soaked earth, something darker underneath that she couldn't name but that made her wolf stir despite the iron cuffs. "You're the rogue my sentries found at the eastern ridge." It wasn't a question. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that didn't need to rise to be heard. "I wasn't trying to trespass, I was following—" A child's cry. "Yes," Salvara told me. He tilted his head slightly, those amber eyes searching her face. "She also told me you were carrying a healer's kit and a child's toy." "The toy was mine. From when I was small. I keep it because—" She stopped. Because it was the only thing she had left from before. Because it reminded her that someone once had cared enough to stitch something for her with their own hands. But she wasn't about to say that to a king. Zorion's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A crack in the stone. "What is your name?" "Amber. No surname. No pack." A rogue healer who follows the sound of children crying into enemy territory. He said it like he was testing the words, seeing how they fit together. Then he stood. Remove the cuffs. The sentry behind him hesitated. Alpha, Salvara ordered, I said, remove them. The cuffs came off. Amber rubbed her wrists, feeling the wolf inside her surge back to the surface, like a drowning thing breaking through water. She gasped softly at the relief of it. Zorian watched her, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something like recognition in his eyes, as if he knew what it felt like to be caged. You'll stay in the guest quarters. You are not a prisoner, but you are not free to leave until I've determined you pose no threat to my pack. A healer may be useful to us. We have wounded from a border dispute 3 days ago. He paused at the door, his back to her. And Amber, do not wander the east wing of the main hall. That area is restricted. He left without waiting for her response. The guest quarters were modest but clean, far better than the cell. A real bed with a wool blanket, a basin of water, a window that opened wide enough to let in the scent of pine. Amber washed her face, changed into a simple tunic someone had left folded on the bed, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. The Alpha King of Ashenmoor had personally come to her cell, removed her restraints, and offered her shelter. That was not standard protocol for a captured rogue. That was barely standard protocol for a visiting dignitary. And he had told her not to go to the East Wing, which meant there was something in the East Wing he didn't want her to see. The next 2 days passed in a careful rhythm. Amber was escorted to the Pax infirmary each morning, where she treated the border dispute wounded alongside Ashenmoor's resident healer, a grizzled older wolf named Haldrick, who grunted more than he spoke but grudgingly admitted, after watching her set a dislocated shoulder with one smooth motion, that she knew what she was doing. The pack watched her with varying degrees of suspicion. Salvara watched her with something worse. The first advisor appeared at every meal, every gathering, every training session where Amber was present, and her gaze followed Amber like a blade tracing a line on skin, deciding where to cut. You've made yourself quite comfortable for a rogue. Salvara settled into the chair beside Amber at dinner on the second night, her smile as thin and sharp as a paper cut. Most strays know their place. I'm grateful for the Alpha King's hospitality. I intend to repay it through my work in the infirmary. The Alpha King's hospitality. Salvara repeated the words slowly, tasting them. Yes, he has been unusually generous with you. One might wonder why. Amber said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was the safest armor. But Salvara wasn't finished. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only Amber could hear. Let me be very clear with you. Zorian is mine. Not officially, not yet, but it is understood. By everyone. I have served this pack for 6 years. I have earned my place at his side. Whatever fantasy you're constructing in that little rogue head of yours, dismantle it now. Because I will not let a packless nobody take what I have spent years building. She pulled back with a bright, false smile, as if they'd been exchanging pleasantries about the weather. I'm a healer, Salvara. I have no interest in politics or positions. Good. See that it stays that way. That night, Amber couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind push through the pines outside her window. The unease in her chest wasn't about Salvara's threat. She'd faced worse from wolves with less restraint. It was the crying. She hadn't heard it since she'd been brought to Ashenmoor, but the memory of it clung to her like a scent she couldn't wash off. A child had been crying in these woods. Alone. Frightened. And Zorian had told her to stay away from the East Wing. She sat up. She told herself not to. She told herself to lie back down, to be smart, to be safe. She told herself that she was a rogue in a foreign pack, and that curiosity was a luxury she could not afford. Then she put on her boots and opened the door. The corridors of Ashenmoor's main hall were quiet at this hour. The torches burned low, casting long shadows that pooled in corners. Amber moved carefully, keeping her footsteps light, her breathing even. She had spent years moving through spaces where she wasn't wanted. Invisibility was second nature. The east wing was separated from the rest of the hall by a heavy oak door, unlocked but clearly intended to be a barrier of expectation rather than force. Amber pushed it open slowly. The corridor beyond was narrower, warmer. The walls were hung with thick tapestries that muffled sound, and the air smelled different here, softer, sweeter, like chamomile and warm milk. A child's smell. She followed it to a door at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, and through the gap, a sliver of candlelight fell across the stone floor. Amber pressed her ear to the wood and listened. Breathing. Small, steady, the rhythm of a sleeping child. And then, another sound. A deeper breath. A man's. She pushed the door open, just an inch. Zarian sat in a chair beside a small bed, his massive frame folded into a position that looked profoundly uncomfortable. His head was tipped back, his eyes closed, one hand resting on the bed, where a small girl slept with her fist curled around his index finger. The girl couldn't have been older than 3. She had dark hair that spread across the pillow in wild curls, round cheeks flushed pink with sleep, and lashes so long they cast shadows. She was tiny, impossibly tiny against the broad hand that held hers. Amber's breath caught. Zarian's eyes opened instantly. The gold in them flared, sharp and alert, and for a moment, his entire body went rigid, a predator identifying a threat. Then he saw her, and the rigidity shifted into something else, something raw. "I told you not to come here." "I know, I'm sorry. I heard her before, in the woods. She was the one crying." Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. The little girl stirred, mumbled something incomprehensible, and tightened her grip on Zarian's finger. He looked down at her, and the expression that crossed his face nearly undid Amber. It was love. Vast, terrified, desperate love. The kind that hollows you out and fills you back up with something that hurts. "Her name is Selene." He said it quietly, as if the name itself were fragile. "She is my daughter, and no one outside this wing knows she exists." Amber stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind her. "How is that possible? You're the Alpha King. Surely people would notice." "Her mother was human." He said it like a confession. "A woman from a village east of here. It was brief, reckless. She died in childbirth, and when I brought Selene home, I realized that if the council, knew I had fathered a half-blood child, they would demand I reject her. Half-bloods are considered—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "Impure." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and heavy. "So you've been hiding her." "For 3 years. The East Wing is restricted. I have 2 trusted attendants who care for her during the day. At night, I come here. Every night." He looked at Amber with an expression that was part defiance, part desperation. "She is my daughter. She is everything, and I will burn this entire kingdom to ash before I let anyone take her from me." Amber felt something crack open inside her chest. She understood. Not the specifics, but the essence of it. The fierce, consuming need to protect something precious in a world that would destroy it if given the chance. She was crying in the woods 2 nights ago. The night I crossed into your territory. Zorion closed his eyes. She got out. One of the attendants fell asleep and Selene, she's fast. Faster than any child should be. She made it past the outer wall before I found her. She was frightened, disoriented. I brought her back, but I couldn't. He shook his head. I can't keep her caged here forever. She needs space. She needs sunlight. She needs someone who... He stopped himself, but Amber heard what he didn't say. She needs someone who knows how to care for her in ways I can't. She needs a healer. Zorion looked at her, really looked at her, with a focus that made the air between them thicken. Why did you follow the crying? Because someone was hurting, and no one else seemed to hear. Something changed in his expression then. Not softening exactly. Zorion was not a man built for softness, but the walls behind his eyes shifted, and for the first time since she'd met him, Amber saw the man behind the king. Tired, lonely, carrying a weight that no one was allowed to share. If I asked you to stay, not as a prisoner, but as her healer, would you? Amber looked at the sleeping child, at the wild, dark curls and the tiny fist, and the way, even in sleep, she held on to her father like he was the only solid thing in the world. Yes. If you've made it this far in the story, that tells me something. You're invested, and I appreciate that more than you know. So please, take 1 second to subscribe to Laura's Alpha Collections so you don't miss the rest of Amber's story and everything else coming next. While you're at it, drop me a comment and tell me what you think. Do you believe Zorion was right to hide Selene? Or was he hurting her by keeping her secret? And if you were Amber, would you trust a king who's already proven he's willing to lie to his entire pack? I read every single comment, and your thoughts matter to me. Welcome to Laura's Alpha Collections. I'm so glad you're here. The days that followed reshaped Amber's world in ways she hadn't thought possible. She became Solene's shadow. Every morning, she slipped into the East Wing before the rest of the pack stirred, bringing with her a basket of supplies: chamomile for calm, elderberry tincture for the cough the child couldn't shake, lavender sachets to tuck beneath her pillow. She learned Solene's rhythms, the way she woke slowly, blinking at the world as if perpetually surprised by it, the way she refused to eat unless someone ate with her, the way she clutched the ears of a stuffed bear so old its stitching was coming undone. The stuffed rabbit in Amber's satchel, the one Salvara had sneered at, became Solene's favorite thing. The little girl carried it everywhere, tucked under one arm, its crooked button eyes staring out at the world with permanent bewilderment. "Bunny is hungry," Selene would announce gravely, holding the rabbit up to the breakfast table. "Then we'd better make Bunny some porridge," Amber would answer, and Solene's face would break into a grin so wide it consumed her entire body, shoulders lifting, feet kicking, a full-body expression of joy that left Amber breathless every single time. Zorion watched this transformation from the edges. He would appear in the East Wing at odd hours, leaning in doorways, standing at windows with his arms crossed and that unreadable expression on his face. But Amber noticed the way his eyes tracked Solene's every movement, cataloging each laugh, each new word, each moment of happiness, as though he were hoarding them against some future darkness. And she noticed the way his gaze lingered on her. It wasn't the look Salvara had accused her of seeking. It wasn't possessive or calculating. It was wondering, as if he couldn't quite understand how she had appeared in this life, why she had followed a child's cry into hostile territory, why she handled his daughter with the same tender precision she used to set a broken bone. One evening, after Selene had fallen asleep with the stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, Zarian walked Amber back to her quarters. They moved through the dim corridor in silence until he spoke. She said your name today, before you arrived. She woke up and the first thing she said was your name. Amber felt the warmth bloom behind her ribs. She's a wonderful child, Zarian. You've done an incredible job with her. I've kept her alive and hidden. That's not the same as raising her well. It absolutely is. She's healthy, she's kind. She laughs easily, which means she feels safe. You gave her that. He stopped walking. They stood in the corridor, the torchlight painting them in gold. And when he turned to face her, there was something in his expression that made the air between them feel thin and dangerous. My wolf knows you. Amber's heart lurched. What? From the moment I walked into that cell, my wolf recognized you. I've been trying to convince myself it's coincidence, proximity, gratitude for what you do for Selene. But it's not. He took a step closer. She could feel the heat radiating off him. You are my mate, Amber. The word detonated in her chest. Mate. Every wolf knew what it meant. The bond that transcended choice, that operated on a level deeper than instinct, that tied two wolves together with a force that couldn't be reasoned with or resisted. She had heard stories about it her entire life, had treated wolves who were sick with longing for mates they hadn't found, had watched bonded pairs move through the world as though tethered by invisible thread. But she had never expected it for herself. Rogues didn't get mates. Omegas didn't get alpha kings. The universe didn't work that way. Zarian, I'm nobody. I'm a packless healer with no bloodline, no status, no... You are not nobody. He said it with such force that her wolf responded before her mind could, a shiver of recognition running through her entire body. You walked into hostile territory because you heard a child crying. You let yourself be captured rather than turn back. You sat in an iron cell all night, and when I asked your name, you gave it without flinching. He was close now, close enough that she could count the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. You are the bravest person I have ever met, and you are mine. Amber's eyes burned. She wanted to argue, to list all the reasons this was impossible, impractical, dangerous. A rogue Omega mated to the Alpha King? The pack would never accept it. Salvara would never accept it. The council would demand his abdication, or worse. But the bond was already there, singing through her veins like a second heartbeat. She could feel it, his steadiness, his fear, his furious hope. She could feel him the way you feel the sun on your face when you step outside after a long winter. You're sure? I have never been more sure of anything in my life. He didn't kiss her, not yet. He simply lifted his hand and pressed his palm against her cheek, and the contact sent a current through both of them that made the torches in the corridor flicker. Amber leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. But belonging, she would learn, came at a price. Salvara struck 3 days later. It began with whispers. Amber noticed them at breakfast, heads leaning together, eyes darting toward her with expressions that had shifted from curiosity to suspicion. The pack members who had been warming to her, who had started greeting her by name in the corridors, now avoided her gaze. By midday, the rumor had solidified into something solid and sharp. The rogue healer was a spy. She had been sent by a rival pack to infiltrate Ashenmoor, to gather intelligence, to seduce the Alpha King and destroy him from within. Haldrick found Amber in the infirmary, his weathered face grim. You need to be careful, girl. Salvara has been pouring poison into every ear that will listen. She's calling for a tribunal. A tribunal? For what? I haven't done anything. Doesn't matter what you've done. Matters what she can make people believe you've done. She's claiming you crossed our borders deliberately, that your healer story is a cover, that she has evidence you're connected to the Brackenmore pack. Amber felt the blood drain from her face. Brackenmore. The pack that had absorbed Fenhollow. The pack that had been making territorial threats against Ashenmoor's southern border for months. If Salvara could tie her to Brackenmore, even falsely, it would mean execution. Haldrick, you know me. You've worked beside me. I know you, but a tribunal doesn't care what I know. It cares about evidence, and Salvara has been building her case since the night you arrived. The tribunal was called that evening. The great hall was packed. Every member of the Ashenmoor pack stood in tiered rows, their faces lit by the massive iron chandeliers that hung from the vaulted ceiling. At the center of the hall, a raised stone platform served as the tribunal stage, and Amber stood upon it alone, her hands unbound, but her heart beating so violently she could feel it in her teeth. Salvara stood at the base of the platform, composed and regal, her crimson gown replaced by ceremonial black. She held a leather folio in her hands like a weapon. Members of Ashenmoor, I bring this tribunal because our security has been compromised. She opened the folio and produced a folded letter, holding it up for the crowd to see. This was intercepted at our southern border 3 days ago. It is a communication between the Brackenmore Alpha and an unnamed contact within our territory, referencing a healer sent to gather information about our defenses. Her gaze swept to Amber with theatrical precision. A healer, sent from the exact direction this rogue entered our lands. The crowd murmured. Amber felt the suspicion pressing against her from every direction. That letter has nothing to do with me. I don't know the Brackenmore Alpha. I have never communicated with anyone in that pack. Can you prove it? Silence. Because she couldn't. She had no pack records, no bond marks, no witnesses to her 3 years of wandering. She was a ghost. And ghosts have no alibis. Salvara smiled. I move for immediate sentencing, exile at minimum, execution if the evidence warrants. This is a fabrication, and everyone in this room knows it. Amber's voice rang out stronger than she felt. She looked at the crowd, at the faces of wolves she had healed, bandaged, sat beside through fevers and infections. I have spent every day in your infirmary. I have treated your children, your elders, your warriors. I came here because I heard a child crying and I could not walk away. That is who I am. If that makes me a spy, then the word has lost all meaning. The murmur shifted. Some faces softened, others hardened, and through it all, Salvara's expression remained fixed in calculated certainty. Then the doors to the great hall slammed open. Zarian entered like a storm-given form. His presence alone silenced the room. Every whisper died, every body straightened, every eye turned to him. He was dressed in black, his stride long and deliberate, and his expression was one Amber had never seen on him before. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something older, colder, more absolute. He walked past Salvara without looking at her. He climbed the platform steps and stood beside Amber, and the sight of the Alpha King standing next to the accused rogue sent a shockwave through the crowd that was almost physical. This tribunal is over. Salvara's composure cracked, just barely, a flicker of something desperate in her eyes. Alpha, the evidence is forged. He turned to face the crowd, and his voice filled the hall like the sound of mountains shifting. "I had the letter examined by our scribe. The seal is Ashenmore's own wax, pressed with a mold that only someone within this pack could access. The handwriting matches no known Brackenmore contact. This letter was written here, by someone who wanted this woman dead." Every eye in the room turned to Salvara. "That is an outrageous accusation. I have served this pack for 6 years. I have given everything." "You have given what served your ambition, Salvara, not what served this pack." He stepped to the edge of the platform and looked out over his people. The torchlight caught the gold in his eyes and made them burn. "I have concealed something from you, all of you. Not because I doubted your loyalty, but because I feared your laws more than I trusted your hearts. I was wrong, and it ends tonight." He turned and walked to the side entrance of the great hall. Every wolf in the room watched, silent, barely breathing. A moment later he returned. Selene was in his arms. The little girl clung to his neck, her dark curls spilling over his shoulder, her wide eyes taking in the sea of faces with a mixture of wonder and terror. She buried her face against his throat, and one small hand fisted in the fabric of his shirt. The silence in the hall was so complete that Amber could hear the child's quickened breathing. "This is Selene. She is my daughter. Her mother was human. Selene is half-blood." He let the words land, let them detonate in the consciousness of every wolf present. "She is 3 years old. She laughs when you tickle her feet. She refuses to eat unless someone eats with her. She sleeps with a stuffed rabbit that was given to her by the woman standing beside me on this platform." He looked at Amber, and the love in his expression was so open, so unguarded, that several wolves in the front row physically stepped back from the force of it. "Amber is not a spy. She is not a rogue. She is my mate, my fated bond, and she has loved my daughter with more courage and tenderness than anyone else in this world." He turned back to the crowd. "If your laws demand that I reject my child because her blood is mixed, then your laws are broken, and I will break them further. If your prejudice demands that I reject my mate because she has no pack and no bloodline, then your prejudice is poison, and I will purge it from Ashenmore, root and stem." He stepped forward, Selene still in his arms, and his voice dropped to a register that vibrated in the bones of every wolf present. "She is mine. They are both mine. And I will stand against every wolf in this hall, every law in this kingdom, every tradition that tells me otherwise. Challenge me if you dare." No one moved. No one breathed. And then, from the back of the hall, Haldrick's gruff voice broke the silence. "About time, you stubborn fool." A ripple of shocked laughter moved through the crowd. Then one of the warriors Amber had healed, a young woman with a bandaged arm, stepped forward and dropped to one knee. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, half the hall was kneeling, not in submission, in acceptance. Salvara stood alone, the forged letter crumpled in her whitening fist, her face contorted with a fury that stripped away every layer of composure she had ever worn. She looked at Zorion with undisguised hatred. "You will destroy this pack for her, for a half-blood child and a packless nobody." "Salvara." His voice was quiet now, quiet and absolute. "You are stripped of your title. You are banished from Ashenmore territory. If you are found within our borders after sunrise, you will be treated as a hostile rogue." He held her gaze, and in that moment, the Alpha King of Ashenmore looked exactly like what he was. A wolf who had found his mate and would devour anything that threatened her. Leave. Silvara's mouth opened, closed. Her eyes swept the hall, searching for allies, for sympathy, for any crack she could exploit. She found none. She turned and walked toward the doors. Her heels clicked against the stone, each step echoing in the vast silence. She didn't look back. The doors closed behind her. Zorion turned to Amber. The fury in his expression dissolved, and what replaced it was something fragile and enormous. Relief, love, terror, hope, all tangled together in a way that made him look both ancient and young. I should have done this sooner. You did it now. That's what matters. Selene lifted her head from Zorion's shoulder and looked at Amber with those wide, dark eyes. Then she reached out both arms, leaning so far toward Amber that Zorion had to shift his grip to keep her from falling. "Bunny lady!" Amber laughed, a sound that was half sob, and took the child into her arms. Selene settled against her chest with a sigh of perfect contentment, one hand finding Amber's hair and twisting it around her fingers, and Amber held her and breathed in the scent of chamomile and warm milk and something else. Something new. Pack. Zorion's hand came to rest on the small of her back, and the bond between them pulsed with a warmth that started in Amber's chest and spread outward until it reached the tips of her fingers and the soles of her feet. She could feel him, not just beside her but inside her, woven into the fabric of who she was. The wolves of Ashenmoor rose from their knees, and for the first time in her life, Amber stood at the center of a room full of people who could see her. The ceremony happened 3 weeks later, under a full moon so bright it turned the clearing into silver. Zorion had wanted to wait, had wanted to give the pack time to adjust, to let the shock of his revelations settle into something stable. But the bond wouldn't be patient, and neither would Selene, who had taken to calling Amber Mama, with the casual certainty of a child who has decided something and sees no reason to discuss it further. The bonding ceremony in Ashenmoor was an old tradition, rarely performed, reserved for mates whose bond was so strong that it demanded formal recognition. Amber and Zorion stood in the center of the clearing, while the pack formed a circle around them, torches flickering in a ring of golden light. Zorion took Amber's hands. His palms were warm, rough, steady. Before this pack, under this moon, I claim you as my mate, my partner, my equal. I offer you my name, my home, my heart, and the protection of every wolf who stands in this circle. Before this pack, under this moon, I accept you, not as a king, but as the man who sat in a chair every night holding his daughter's hand. I offer you my strength, my loyalty, my healing, and every part of myself I thought no one would ever want. The pack howled. The sound rose from 40 throats and climbed into the night sky, a chorus of acceptance that reverberated through the pines and echoed off the mountains and carried across the graywood to every territory that bordered Ashenmoor. The Alpha King had a mate. She was a rogue, a healer, an Omega with no bloodline and no pack. And she was their Luna. Selene, perched on Haldric's shoulders at the edge of the clearing, waved the stuffed rabbit over her head and screamed with the volume and enthusiasm that only a 3-year-old could produce. "Bunny says hooray!" The pack laughed. Zorion laughed, a sound Amber realized she had never heard before, open and full and utterly without restraint. He pulled her against him and pressed his forehead to hers, and the bond between them blazed like a second moon. Thank you for following the crying. Thank you for letting me in. They stood in the silver light, their daughter cheering from an old healer's shoulders, their pack howling around them, and the night held them all in its vast, gentle hands. Amber had spent her whole life being invisible. Now the whole world could see her, and she was finally home. Did you enjoy the story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to share where you're watching from, your country, state, or city. You might be featured in our next shout-out. Special thanks to our top commenters of the week for hyping the video, and to our amazing viewers from Oamaru, New Zealand, Jackson, Tennessee, Cherokee, North Carolina, Maui, Hawaii, Melbourne, Australia, Hutchinson, Kansas, Adelanto, California, USA, and Nova Scotia, Canada. And to everyone watching around the world, your support means more than you know. Click the videos on your screen to continue the journey with more stories like this. Subscribe and stay with us. The next story is waiting. Thank you for watching.